I shall begin with an early poem called Legal Fiction, because this, in a way, is the formula I started writing on, as many other people were doing, writing like the metaphysical poets of the 17th century. This is what they called a conceit. It works on the idea that it's rather absurd that the owner of land, owns the air above and the depth down to the earth. And the whole poem is just arguing from that, except right in the last line, where it's considered fair to throw the conceit away. And the end, of course, means the death of the owner, as well as the geometrical end of his cone at the center of the earth. But it is strictly doing the arguing from the point, and the poetry is expected to come from the argument. That's the whole idea of reviving the metaphysicals, which I was doing much more simply than anybody else, really, more crudely, if you like. So that's the poem. It's called Legal Fiction. Law makes long spokes of the short stakes of men. Your well-fenced-out real estate of mind, no high flat of the nomad citizen looks over or train leaves behind. Your rights extend under and above your claim without bound. You own land in heaven and hell. Your part of Earth's surface and mass the same, of all cosmos' volume, and all stars as well. Your rights reach down where all owners meet, in hell's pointed exclusive conclave at Earth's center. Your spun farm's root still on that axis dwells, and up through galaxies a growing sector. You are nomad yet. The lighthouse beam you own flashes like Lucifer through the firmament. Earth's axis varies. Your dark central cone wavers a candle's shadow at the end. And I should read the poem called To an Old Lady, which was really about my mother, and greatly to my relief, my mother thought it was about my grandmother, which was fully correct, because it's meant to be what anybody feels about their mother, and she felt it about her own mother. Otherwise it would have been very embarrassing. But she, of course, is a planet, and I should be very doubtful to say what the last verse in a way means, but it means that we have so much in common, and yet in a way we cannot talk to each other. All children feel that it's rather sad they can't do their parents any good in this way. Such is the point of To an Old Lady. Ripeness is all. Her in her cooling planet revere. Do not presume to think her wasted. Project her no projectile, plan nor man it. Gods cool in turn by the sun long outlasted. Our earth, alone given no name of God, gives to no hold for such a leap to aid her. Landing you break some palace and seem odd. Bees sting their need, the keeper's queen invader. No, to your telescope, spy out the land. Watch while her ritual is still to see. Still stand her temples emptying in the sand, whose waves o'erthrew their crumbled tracery. Still stand uncalled on her soul's appanage. Much social detail whose successor fades. Wit used to run a house and to play bridge, and tragic fervour to dismiss her maids. Years her precession do not throw from gear. She reads a compass certain of her pole. Confident finds no confines on her sphere, whose failing crops are in her sole control. Stars how much further from me fill my night. Strange that she too should be inaccessible, who shares my sun. He curtains her from sight, and but in darkness is she visible. I want now to do one called, a very short poem called Camping Out, which is carrying the the conceit method very far. The basic idea, without which it's hopeless to listen to, really, is that these two young lovers are camping in by a lake, and when you clean your teeth into the lake, the actual spots of soap, owing to the way the surface tension works, the spots spread apart so that they look as if they were expanding, as if you were coming close to a series of stars. It's merely on this tiny fact which the whole thing is based. And of course, you may think that you may think it's disgusting. What it's meant to suggest is, I don't care whether you think it's disgusting or not. It doesn't seem disgusting to me. That's the way up it's meant to be. Camping out. And now she cleans her teeth into the lake, gives it God's grace for her own bounty's sake, what morning's pale and the crisp mist debars. Its glass of the divine that will could break restores beyond nature, or lets heaven take, itself being dimmed, her pattern, who half awake milks between rocks a straddled sky of stars. Soap tension the star pattern magnifies. Smoothly Madonna through assumes the skies, whose vaults are open to receive the Lord. No, it is we soaring explore galaxies. Our bullet's boat light speed by thousands flies. Who moves so among stars, their frame undies. See where they blur and die, and are outsawed. Poem called The Last Pain. I want to read, though I was very shocked soon after it first appeared, because somebody said I was like Oscar Wilde. I was praising lying and affectation. This disturbed me very much. I hadn't thought I was like Oscar Wilde, praising lying and affectation, but it's very hard to say what the difference is. I think really that so much of this poetry is meant to be extremely general remarks, really. It applies to all sorts of life. And the cases I was thinking of were rather different from the cases Oscar Wilde was thinking of. I don't know if there's any other great difference, but I've always been slightly uneasy about the poem ever since. However, it is straightforwardly saying that if you adopt a character, so to speak, you grow into it. This Last Pain is what it's called. The fathers, of course, are the theologians, the fathers of the church. This last pain for the damned the fathers found. They knew the bliss with which they were not crowned. Such but on earth, let me foretell, is all of heaven or of hell. Man, as the prying housemaid of the cell, may know her happiness by eye to hole. He's safe, the key is lost. He knows a door will not open, nor hole close. What is conceivable can happen too, said Wittgenstein, who had not dreamt of you. But wisely, if we worked it long, we should forget where it was wrong. Those thorns are crowns which, woven into knots, crackle under and soon boil fools' pots. And no man's watching, wise and long, would ever stir them into song. Thorns burn to a consistent ash like man, a splendid cleanser for the frying pan. And those who leap from pan to fire should this brave opposite admire. All those large dreams by which men long live well are magic lanterned on the smoke of hell. This then is real, I have implied, a painted small transparent slide. These the inventive can hand-paint at leisure, or most emporia would stock our measure, and feasting in their dappled shade we should forget how they were made. Feign then what's by a decent tact believed, and act that state is only so conceived, and build an edifice of form for a house where phantoms may keep warm. Imagine then, by miracle with me, ambiguous gifts as what God's give must be, what could not possibly be there, and learn a style from a despair. I want to read a poem called Reflection from Rochester, which comes out of, we've now got on to my second book of poems very much. This was called The Gathering Storm, and literally meant what, indeed, Sir Winston Churchill meant by his later book of the same name, what we felt about the gradual approach of the Second World War. It was it's a thing on people's minds, though my book didn't really come up to the title, of course. But it's called Reflection from Rochester, and it's quoting the satire on man by the 17th century poet Rochester, who said, that men are, the animals fight for good reasons, but the men fight for absurd reasons, and I sort of elaborate this reflection, do you see? But a wretched man is still in arms for fear. I'm simply quoting Rochester. Such is the way it goes. As to this, there are things in the text in inverted commas, meaning they're attempted suicides. Well, it is remarkable when you consider how dreadfully easy it is to destroy the human body that so many people just fail to commit suicide. It looks as if they're in two minds about it. Such was what I meant by putting inverted commas round attempted suicide. It is a general reflection about the reasons why people so somehow willingly approach these great world wars. Do you see? That is what he's thinking about. Such is the theme of Reflection from Rochester. And he said, from fear to fear, successively betrayed, with which I begin. From fear to fear, successively betrayed. By making risks to give a cause for fear, feeling safe with causes and from birth afraid. By climbing higher not to look down. By mere destruction of the accustomed because strange, too complex a loved system or too clear. By needing change but not too great a change, and therefore a new fear. Man has achieved all the advantage of a wider range. Successfully has the first fear deceived, thought the wheels run on sleepers. This is not the law of nature, it has been believed. Increasing power, it has increased a lot, embarrasses attempted suicides, narrows their margin. Policies that got virility from war get much besides. The mind, as well in mining as in gas wars parallel, now less easily decides on a good root confusion to amass much safety from irrelevant despair. Mere change in numbers made the process crass. We now turn blank eyes for a pattern there where first the race of armament was made, where a less involute compulsion played. For hunger or for love they bite and tap. There's a series in the book there which goes on to a poem called Ignorance of Death, and here for once I'm not writing in regular metre. It's printed in as if it went in terza rima, but it doesn't rhyme or scan. Well, of course, it's frightfully hard to write good vers libre. The reason I'm doing it here is that, I'm not doing it here. The reason I'm sort of chucking away rhyme and metre is to say, oh, well, it's not meant to feel poetical somehow. It's trying to get below it. It's all right for a trick once in a way, but you have to be to write real vers libre is very much harder. I'd like to put this in, just to show what happens if I try to give it up, do you see? It's a poem called Ignorance of Death. It's still on this line of reflection about the coming Second World War, do you see? Then there is this civilizing love of death, by which even music and painting tell us what else to love. Buddhists and Christians contrive to agree about death, making death their ideal basis for different ideals. The communists, however, disapprove of death, except when practical. The people who dig up corpses and rape them are, I understand, not reported. The Freudians regard the death wish as fundamental, though the clamour of life proceeds from its rival Eros. Whether you are to admire a given case for making less clamour is not the story. Liberal hopefulness regards death as a mere border to an improving picture. Because we have neither hereditary nor direct knowledge of death, it is the trigger of the literary man's biggest gun, and we are happy to equate it to any conceived calm. Heaven me, when a man is ready to die about something other than himself, and is in fact ready because of that, not because of himself, that is something clear about himself. Otherwise, I feel very blank upon this topic, and think that though important and proper for anyone to bring up, it is one that most people should be prepared to be blank upon. And the next one in the book is the villanelle called Missing Dates. You understand it's this very tight villanelle form. The difficulty of writing them, anybody can push the lines into order, is to stop it from dying as it goes on. It's therefore hard to read because the repeated lines are supposed to mean something else each time they're repeated, and the test of it is whether it works like that. I always feel it's a very hard thing to read properly, to justify the form. I was put onto it by James Joyce, who wrote a villanelle in Portrait of the Artist of the Young Man. I don't know what the earlier villanelles were like, really, but that one was so wonderful that I tried to imitate it. Missing dates, by the way, I believe to be American slang, but my American friends tell me it isn't. It merely means failing to come to an appointment, owing to forgetfulness and things of that kind. It's the trivial failures of life are what waste your spirit, and of course when I say that it's meant to seem trivial compared to the more solemn truths earlier. It's meant to end slightly funny, but it's there again it's rather hard to make it end slightly funny. Such is the difficulty of reading the thing. Slowly the poison, the whole bloodstream fills. It is not the effort nor the failure tires. The waste remains and kills. It is not your system or clear sight that mills down small to the consequence a life requires. Slowly the poison, the whole bloodstream fills. They bled an old dog dry, yet the exchange rills of young dog blood gave but a month's desires. The waste remains and kills. It is the Chinese tombs and the slag hills usurp the soil, and not the soil retires. Slowly the poison, the whole bloodstream fills. Not to have fire is to be a skin that shrills. The complete fire is death. From partial fires, the waste remains and kills. It is the poems you have lost, the ills from missing dates at which the heart expires. Slowly the poison, the whole bloodstream fills. The waste remains and kills. I'd like now to read a silly little poem which I wrote almost before, in a way. I'd found I'd stopped writing poetry, but it's been kindly praised by a few friends. It seems to me so slight, but I will read it because it is a fact that I found I couldn't write poetry somehow anymore, and here is a poem about it. It's called Let It Go. It is this deep blankness is the real thing strange. The more things happen to you, the more you can't tell or remember even what they were. The contradictions cover such a range. The talk would talk and go so far aslant. You don't want madhouse and the whole thing there. I'd like now to read a poem called Aubade, which is another of these complicated, tiresome meters. The Aubade, of course, was a I'd like now to read a poem called Aubade, which is another of these complicated, tiresome meters. The Aubade, of course, was a song sung to the lovers at dawn. But this is about an earthquake in Japan. And, of course, the political, it's about 1932 or so. The political background is the what they call the Manchurian incident, which was felt at the time, and in fact was part of the lead-up towards the Second World War. You see, you may say, what on earth has this curious bit of love story to do with the approach of the Second World War? Well, really, it was very practical indeed. Everybody felt it was very unwise to marry a Japanese lady if you knew you were going to be fighting them in 1932 or so. It's quite sensible in that way. Hours before dawn, we were woken by the quake. My house was on a cliff. The thing could take bookloads off shelves, break bottles in a row. Then the long pause, and then the bigger shake. It seemed the best thing to be up and go. And far too large for my feet to step by, I hoped that various buildings were brought low. The heart of standing as you cannot fly. It seemed quite safe till she got up and dressed. The guarded tourist makes the guide the test. Then I said, the garden. Laughing, she said no. Taxi for her, and for me healthy rest. It seemed the best thing to be up and go. The language problem, but you have to try. Some solid ground for lying could she show. The heart of standing as you cannot fly. None of these deaths were her point at all. The thing was that being woken he would bawl, and finding her not in earshot he would know. I tried saying half an hour to pay this call. It seemed the best thing to be up and go. I slept, and blank as that I would yet lie, till you have seen what a threat holds below, the heart of standing as you cannot fly. Tell me again about Europe and her pains. Who's tortured by the drought, who by the rains? Glut me with floods where only the swine can row. Who cuts his throat and let him count his gains? It seemed the best thing to be up and go. A bedshift flight to a far eastern sky, only the same war on a stronger toe, the heart of standing as you cannot fly. Tell me more quickly what I lost by this, or tell me with less drama what they miss who call no dire god for a good throw, who say after two aliens had one kiss it seemed the best thing to be up and go. But as to risings, I can tell you why. It is on contradiction that they grow. It seemed the best thing to be up and go. Up was the heartening and the strong reply. The heart of standing is we cannot fly. Well, I want now to give the poem called Bacchus, which does seem to me quite impossible to hear in reading. But after all, Dylan Thomas thought that was not my best poem, only good poem, and I ought to try to read it. It's very packed with puns and such like. It's about drink, you understand, and the idea is that the gods are making this, are distilling spirit. By the way, I'm still imitating Don in doing this. Don's mind was completely, one of the things Don was always writing about, at least, was the limbeck and distilling, and I'm doing this again. I make the classical gods distill. Well, of course, I'm quite wrong. I understand that gin was one of the first discoveries of one of the first triumphs of industrial chemistry. It belongs to the modern world to distill, and I suppose in Don's time it was fairly new. But that is what I'm really meaning. I'm still, in a way, writing about Hitler. You'll see the process of, who of course didn't drink, but he was mad enough to make everybody believe his delusion. So that is really what it's about. It's the people who are like drunkards, who
swing everybody into believing what they believe. Such is such is what is being thought about. The first verse is about Bacchus himself, and of course the story is that he was born from Semele by the destruction of her. He is starting the distilling. The second god is Neptune and Noah and so forth. They are doing the boiling and bubbling inside this retort, you see. The confusion necessary before a new opinion is arrived at. You can't settle people's minds without confusing them first, is the idea. So that all this boiling and bubbling of Neptune is going on inside the round retort. The third verse is the fire under the retort, which is boiling it. You see, it's Prometheus who brought fire to man, and Shelley and all that. The picture of him punished for bringing his gifts to man. The fourth verse is Mercury. It's the thermometer. I suppose it's the self-conscious mind. He's trying to know about this, and the thermometer bursts and spoils the reaction because the mercury gets into it. It's the self-consciousness, do you see it, of the nervous breakdown after a certain degree of drink. I notice they do give out. Whether that corresponds to the politicians very tightly, I'm not quite sure, but that's the idea. The politicians like Hitler, I mean. Then the end of the poem is, it goes back to a personal situation about a lady who was feeling the entire background of this thing. I don't think it needs anything else saying about it. There are a lot of puns. I should explain that it's mostly written in couplets going across the couplet with a lot of brackets in the printed form, which means that you're supposed to do a lot of waiting for the meaning to come in, which ought somehow to be put out in the reading, which is. Of course, it's expressing confusion, which is always a difficult process if you wish to be tidy and do your art. And I'm, as I say, I think it's easier to read than to hear, but never mind. This is Bacchus. The laughing god, born of a startling answer, symbol of clash and the divided glancer, forcing from heavens the force of earth's desire, capped a retort to sublime earth by fire, and starred round within man its salt and glitter. A round goblet, but for star or world map fitter, earth lost in him is still but earth fulfilled. Troubled the water till the spirit stilled, and flowered round tears of wine round the dimmed flask. The roundest ones crack least under this task. It is the delicate glass stands heat better than stone. This is the vessel could have stood alone were it not fitted both to earth and sky, which trickled to a sea though wit was dry, making a brew thicker than blood, being brine, being the mother water that was first made blood, all living blood, and whatever blood makes wine. The god architect, whose coping with the flood groined the white stallion arches of the main, and minor deeps that in the dome of the brain take iris arches, pupillage and word, walked on the bucking water like a bird, and God went round its rampart and its ball. Columba's egg sat on earth's garden wall, and held the equitation of his bar. Waves beat his bounds until he foamed a star, and mapped with fire the skyline that he ploughed. Trod and divined the enwheeling serene cloud, and who knows if Narcissus, dumb and bent, shed and fermented to a firmament may use his pool as mirror for the skies. Blind heroes, revelation peacock eyes. Before and behind trophies the golden throne may still be planted on. Incestuous chaos will breed permanent. Held to earth's centre, Ixion at the wheel, he boxed the compassing of his appeal. Her centaur, born thence, schooled this hero, the paunched beaker, ether cooled. Still makes go round the world a fool, the clouded wheel. The god who fled down with a standard yard, surveying with that reed which was his guard, he showed to John the New Jerusalem. It was a sugar cane containing rum, and hence the fire on which these works depend. Taut and quivered, strung upon the bend, an outmost crystal, a recumbent flame. He drinks all cups the tyrant could acclaim. He still is dumb, illimitably wind, burns still his nose and liver for mankind. It is an ether, such an agony. In the thin, choking air of Caucasus, he under operation lies forever, smelling the chlorine in the chloroform. The plains around him flood with the destroyers, pasturing the stallions and the standing corn. The herm whose length measured degrees of heat, a small lower that sunned itself in Mercury, and perked one word there that made space ends meet, fluttered his snake too lightly into sea, most fertile thief, and journal to enquire, the mortal Eden forming and the fire. A smash resounding in its constancy, this burst the planet Bacchus in the sky. Thence dry lone asteroids took heart to beat. So soon the amalgam with Mercury, this plumbing, given with it free, the house not built with hands, the silver crucible but armed, the sovereigns, eats into flaked sloughs. Paced for the backs of mirrors there he lies, leper scales fall always from his eyes. She whom the god had snatched into a cloud came up my stair and called to me across the gulf she floated over of despair. Came roaring up as through triumphal arches, called I should warm my hands on her gold cope, called her despair the coping of her fire. The god, in making fire from her despair, cast from the parabola of falling arches an arch that cast his focus to the skyline, cold focus burning from the other's fire, Arachne sailing her own rope of cloud, a tracer photon with a rocket's lifeline, and purged his path with a thin fan of fire. Round steel behind the lights of the god's car, a wheel of fire that span her head across, borne soaring forward through a crowd of cloud. Robed in fire, round as heaven's cope, the god had lit up her despair to fire, fire behind grates of a part of her despair, and rang like bells the vaults and the dark arches. I want finally to do a little bit of translation from a Chinese ballad. I once said I don't really know Chinese, but while I was in Peking I was able to take advice on the meaning of the characters, so it is really literal translation. And it does, in a way, I think, clean your palate after hearing my stuff. You would hear the great international ballad. I think it's so good and so straight. And it just fell into English ballad style. It is literal translation, and it's, in a way, it's not my poem, but it's a good change at the end of hearing my poems, I think. This guerrilla fighter is fighting the Japanese, do you see? Actually, It's it's been made into an opera. It's very well thought of in communist China, but the subject is not that. The subject is simply national resistance, do you see? He is leaving the girl and going back to doing this guerrilla fighting. I should perhaps say that they cross where the stream turns. I didn't put that in for the rhyme. They cross where the stream turns because it spreads out there and it's always more shallow. You would cross where the stream turns. I put in a little bit about the two words about doll. I mean the sentence about dolls, merely because the Chinese character means dolls for children, and this I think is meant to be the point of the Chinese. It isn't quite in the English. The rest of it is word for word literal. Now he has seen the girl Xiang Xiang, and now back to the guerrilla band, and she goes with him down the vale and pauses at the strand. The mud is yellow, deep and thick, and their feet stick where the stream turns. Make me two models out of this that clutches as it yearns. Make one of me and one of you, and both shall be alive. Were there no magic in the dolls, the children could not thrive. When you have made them, smash them back. They yet shall live again. Again make dolls of you and me, but mix them grain by grain. So your flesh shall be part of mine, and part of mine be yours. Brother and sister we shall be, whose unity endures. Always the sister doll will cry, made in these careful ways. Cry on and on. Come back to me. Come back in a few days. I think that really is metaphysical poetry. Well, it seems to me odd to have prose recorded in a way as being kindly suggested, but I could read this bit of towards the end of an essay on Alice in Wonderland, which is rather like a poem. As a matter of fact, it's slightly overwritten, I think, for the printed page, but it's, I was so charmed by the subject in a way. My great respect for Alice in Wonderland made me write this almost like a poem in a way, so perhaps it is sensible to read it aloud as if it was a poem. The Queen, the White Queen I was discussing. The Queen is a very inclusive figure. Looking before and after, with the plaintive turn of universal altruism, she lives chiefly backwards in history. The necessary darkness of growth, the mysteries of self-knowledge, the self-contradictions of the will, the antinomies of philosophy, the very looking-glass itself impose this. Nor is it mere weakness to attempt to resolve them only in the direct impulse of the child. Gathering the more dream rushes, her love for man becomes the more universal, and herself the more like a porcupine. Knitting with more and more needles, she tries to control life by a more and more complex intellectual apparatus, the progress of Herbert Spencer. Any one shelf of the shop is empty. The atmosphere is, but there is always something very interesting. The atmosphere of the place is so interesting, which moves up as you look at it from shelf to shelf. There is jam only in the future and our traditional past. And the test made by Alice, who sent value through the ceiling as if it were quite used to it, shows that progress can never reach value because its habitation and name is heaven. The Queen's scheme of social reform, which is to punish those who are not respectable before their crimes are committed, seems to be another of these jokes about progress. But if you hadn't done them, the Queen said, that would have been better still, better and better and better. Her voice went higher with each better, till it got to quite a squeak at last. There is a similar attack in The Walrus and the Carpenter, who are impressed by the spectacle of unimproved nature, and engage in charitable work among oysters. The carpenter is a castle, and the walrus, who could eat so many more because he was crying behind his handkerchief, was a bishop in the scheme at the beginning of the book. But in saying so, one must be struck by the depth at which the satire is hidden. The queerness of the incident and the characters takes on a Wordsworthian grandeur and aridity, and the landscape defined by the tricks of facetiousness takes on the remote and staring beauty of the ideas of the insane. It is odd to find that Tenniel went on to illustrate Poe in the same manner. Dodgson is often doing what Poe wanted to do, and can do it the more easily because he can safely introduce the absurd. The idiot boy of Wordsworth is too milky a moonlit creature to be at home with nature as she was deplored by the carpenter, and much of the technique of the rudeness of the Mad Hatter has been learned from Hamlet. It is the ground base of this kinship with insanity, I think, that makes it so clear that the books are not trifling, and the cool courage with which Alice accepts madmen that gives them their strength.